This blue planet of ours is inhabited by billions of animals, creatures of every shape and size you could imagine. But there's one very unique creature that has asserted dominance over all others: man. Seen by many to be an example of perfect design, man has reflected this perfection through many great milestones over the millennia. There's always been one elusive achievement that has remained confined to myth. With all of their greatness, could man create something to rival their own perfection? Could man make a man-made man? Tonight we'll take a look at two famous examples where man attempted to do just that, but ended up creating monsters instead. My name is Anunnaki, and in this episode of Crypto Crossing we'll be taking a look at the monster of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and the clay golem of Hebrew legend. For the uninitiated, Crypto Crossing is the show where we look at who these monsters are, what they can do, and finally discuss why one of them would beat the other in a fight. Who is the Golem? The Golem is a magical being found in Jewish mythology, believed to be supernaturally animated from inanimate matter such as earth or clay. The name Golem is said to have a couple meanings, generally things like shapeless, incompleted, or raw form, sometimes alluding to the first man God created in the Bible, Adam, before he is given a soul to make him a true human. Similarly, the golem in myth is described as being constructed from raw earth and given life, but not a soul. If a ghost is spirit without form, then the golem is form without spirit. Every great myth starts with a kernel of truth, and here that's the historical rabbi Judah Loew, famously known as the Maharal of Prague. Born in Poland in the early 1500s, Loew was an incredibly bright young man. Rather than needing a teacher, Loew demonstrated a remarkable ability to study and learn on his own, and achieved greatness among his contemporary scholars. As a well-respected rabbi, Loew traveled to the city of Prague and sought to serve the local Jewish community that was coming under prosecution. The rabbi's guidance in the community alone would not be enough to defuse the situation, but the clever Loew had an idea he believed would work. Drawing from lost knowledge and forbidden practices, the rabbi made the decision to take the forces of life and death into his own hands to create a guardian that would protect the community. Using clay from the banks of the Vltava River, a human figure of great size was carefully shaped and sculpted. Following the inscription of a Shem, one of the sacred names of God, the earthen mass was given life. The being rose to his feet, subservient to his creator's command, and he was given the name Yosef, but he was far from human. Rabbi Loew could do many great things, but only God himself could create a human soul. As such, Yosef was left unable to speak and incapable of true independent thought. But these were not needed as, with his imposing presence and protection, peace began to return to the ghetto and its inhabitants. And Yosef wasn't merely a bodyguard, he performed many labors to help serve the community. With his strength he could easily carry cargo for great distances, support in construction, and even carry out menial chores for days on end without tiring. There was one other important trait Yosef possessed. With each passing day he grew in power, and with this power he grew in size and strength. In some stories he would grow smarter too, and began to become jealous of humanity and grow to hate all those around him. It was feared that after 7 days he would become too powerful to control, and thus an arrangement was made. Each Friday the rabbi would remove the Shem and the golem would return to lifelessness. only to be reactivated the following Sabbath, and the cycle of work and rest would be repeated. That is, until one fateful night, Rabbi Lowe made the critical mistake of forgetting to deactivate Yosef. When the Sabbath day arrived, he lost all control and went on a rampage. Some say this was actually because Yosef had fallen in love with a human girl, and became furious when she did not return his affection. Nevertheless, Yosef ran amok through the city, smashing buildings and uprooting trees, in some accounts even murdering all civilians he came across. If allowed to continue, this destruction would only worsen as Yosef grew more powerful. It was feared that the untamed golem would eventually grow powerful enough to destroy the very earth beneath him. Amidst the chaos, the rabbi acted quickly. He cornered Yosef and removed the Shem, deactivating him for the final time and allowing him to crumble into pieces. The story goes on to say that the golem's remains were stored in the attic of the old new synagogue, where he could be restored to life again if needed. Unfortunately, that day never came, and here the tale of Yosef comes to a close. Who is Frankenstein? Frankenstein is a man from the fictional work of Mary Shelley. Believed to be the first true work of science fiction, the novel in question was written by Mary Shelley in 1818 and goes as follows. In Geneva, Switzerland in the 1700s, Victor Frankenstein was born to a wealthy and prosperous family. Bolstered by his many loved ones, it was clear he was destined for greatness. Determined to place himself among the greatest minds in history, Victor began to unravel the secrets of the universe and made perhaps the greatest scientific achievement imaginable. Victor discovered how to bestow life to non-living matter, but he knew a few test runs would not be sufficient to prove his genius. A specimen was needed to showcase the true power of this discovery. Using the most ideal body parts society had to offer, Victor assembled the limbs of athletes, the hands and eyes of artists, and the brain of a genius. Finally, Victor flipped the switch and delivered the spark of life into the lifeless mass. But rather than a sight of true wonder, what Victor saw was a mountain of discolored yellow flesh, pulsing unnaturally and busting at the seams as blackened blood circulated through its previously deceased veins. Victor watched now in horror as he had given life not to a man, but to a monster instead. Throughout the novel, this monster is never given a true name. However, in the many decades that have followed its release, the name Frankenstein has become ingrained as denoting the monster rather than its creator. While this is sometimes considered erroneous, for the sake of this episode I will use this name for quickly referring to the monster. But was he really a monster? Initially, Frankenstein was only a monster in appearance, so ugly that he caused all who saw him to tremble in fear, curse him with bad names, and lash out at him with violence. Mirroring these feelings, Victor abandoned his creation, and the young Frankenstein was left to roam the wilderness, cold, alone, and confused. In his time alone, he began to learn very quickly, even observing others from afar in secret. Over the course of 2 years, Frankenstein learned to read and speak, but he also learned of the cruelty of mankind. Because of his appearance, he could form no friends, and the abandonment of his creator meant he had no family. This filled Frankenstein with much sadness and despair, emotions which eventually gave way to thoughts of anger and revenge. Why was he created to exist in such eternal suffering? For what reasons did he deserve to be hated by all those who saw him? Why was an innocent soul such as his deprived of something all living things deserve? Love. Cursing his own father for creating him so, Frankenstein decided to inflict upon Victor the same despair that he felt himself. The monster's wrath resulted in the deaths of Victor's younger brother, his father, his 2 closest friends, and even his lover. Victor could have avoided this fate if he had agreed to his creation's one and only request. Cure me of my loneliness by creating for me a true companion, a bride, or you and the rest of humanity will continue to suffer my wrath. Seeing the chaos created by only one of these creatures, Victor imagined what destruction a pair of them could create together. And if the 2 should breed, then a race of such monsters could threaten to destroy all of mankind. Instead, Victor sought to destroy his creation before it could do more harm, and pursued it to the ends of the earth, a chase that eventually drove Victor to his own untimely demise. With his creator now dead, Frankenstein resolved to retire to the furthest corner of the North Pole, where he would finally take his own life by incinerating himself in a great fire. Now that we've gotten to know who tonight's combatants are, let's take a look at exactly what they are and what they can do. The golem is an artificial being constructed out of clay. The exact size is different from story to story, but is generally said to be 6 to 8 feet in height and weigh hundreds of pounds. In many tales, the golem was said to increase in size over time. The golem also possesses what is called a defunct physiology, meaning he is not affected by things such as hunger or fatigue, and thus does not require rest. While not definitive, Frankenstein appears to be a sort of medical chimera, an organism whose cells originate from different genotypes. The majority of his parts come from ideal humans, but some parts, such as a few bones and perhaps even his heart, are implied to be of animal origin. Regardless, the giant appears to function nearly identically to how any 8-foot-tall human would, for the most part. The biggest difference being his semi-defunct physiology. Technically alive, Frankenstein does become tired and hungry like any other living thing. His limits for this, however, are absurdly high compared to a normal human, requiring less food and rest and able to perform at peak physicality for very long periods of time before getting tired. It should go without saying that the golem is incredibly strong. Since the day of its creation, the golem was able to perform many feats of labor such as heavy lifting, far beyond what any normal human could accomplish. But it doesn't end there. The golem's strength was famously noted to have increased in time as it grew in power. After 1 week, the golem was able to destroy buildings and uproot trees as he went about his rampage. While this is not definitive, the buildings in Prague appear to be made from brick and large stone, requiring several tons of force to demolish efficiently. Frankenstein has similarly shown many incredible feats of strength, such as busting through a series of steel chains used to restrain him. Chains of this kind would typically be built to carry weights of 2 tons before snapping, meaning Frankenstein would need to exert at least 9,000 newtons to perform this feat, double what the typical athlete can output. Surprisingly enough, this level of strength is to be expected for a person of this size. In the mid-1800s, a man named Angus MacAskill grew to 7 feet 9 inches in height, and was famously noted for many incredible feats of strength. One such feat was lifting a 2.5-ton anchor over his shoulder and carrying it for quite some distance. At one point in the novel, Frankenstein also destroys a cottage with his bare hands, suggesting the former feat is not his upward limit of strength. The golem doesn't seem to have any notable feats of speed, instead depicted as a lumbering giant. Of course, with an increased size, the golem would take longer strides and cover greater distance while walking. Possibly the most unexpected trait about the monster is his unnaturally great speed. While running downhill, Frankenstein was noted as moving faster than the speed of an eagle in flight. If taken literally, this would make him anywhere from 75 to 100 miles per hour, but of course this could also have been an exaggeration. Maybe another feat could shed some more light. Earlier in the book, Victor witnesses his creation scaling the side of Mount Saleve, climbing the sheer wall of rock before reaching the top and disappearing. The book never specifies exactly how long this takes him, but it happens between multiple flashes of lightning during a storm and is remarked as being significantly faster than any normal human could follow. The world record for professional speed climbing is around 6 seconds to climb 15 meters. If we scaled the regulation climbing wall to 250 meters like the side of Mount Saleve, then it should take maybe a minute and a half. Of course, a real mountain isn't as consistent as a regulation climbing wall, and normal athletes would get tired as they climb. So instead, let's compare this to this free climb of Lover's Leap, in which professional climber Dan Osman took 4.5 minutes to climb by hand alone. Of course, our monster here is aided by his much greater reach and stride, as well as his inability to get tired during the climb. If he maintained a peak speed for the entire climb while also making use of his longer reach, then he should easily have completed this climb in under a minute, which would make him 3 to 4 times faster than professional speed climbers. If this same logic is applied to other applications like running, then it stands to reason he would also be 3 to 4 times faster than professional sprinters. Conveniently enough, that would make him 75 to 100 miles per hour, which would indicate the eagle in flight statement was not mere hyperbole but instead a roughly accurate speed estimate. This would put Frankenstein's monster in the subsonic range. In a dead sprint, he would be moving faster than the naked eye could see. At first, the golem would logically be about as durable as ordinary fired clay. Yes, rather than raw or malleable clay, The myth usually mentions the golem as internally heating and firing itself during its creation. Clay is a strong and versatile material used around the world across history, but it is also brittle and able to fracture. As the golem gains power throughout the week, however, it appears his durability goes up as well. As mentioned before, the golem was noted to have smashed and destroyed several buildings during his rampage, and therefore must be at least as durable as the rock and brick in order to have not broken his own fists in the process. That said, for as strong as his clay might be, it is commonly believed that the golem does not possess natural means of physical regeneration or healing. As such, his brittle form is sometimes shown to develop cracks over time. These imperfections, however, sometimes get repaired or reinforced using beams of steel. Reinforcement like this is quite common in building materials like concrete, although this isn't exactly the same when working with clay. Nevertheless, this creates what is known as a composite material that takes advantage of both the material's biggest strengths. While Frankenstein may not have as hard an exterior, his tissue has shown to have great superhuman levels of resilience. Physical attacks from able-bodied adults do little to nothing to him, and the monster has even shrugged off gunfire. Bullets do wound him, but as evident from a point-blank shot to the heart, he does not appear to succumb to his injuries like a normal human would. He does require time for these injuries to heal, but much less than a normal person. Contrary to popular belief, Frankenstein does feel pain, he simply shows a much higher tolerance to it. This is important to note because pain is the body's way of detecting injury, something which teaches us to avoid things that bring us harm. I would also like to note that his regeneration doesn't seem to exactly be healing in the traditional sense. Where in a normal body, healthy cells would divide to create new tissue to replace the damaged tissue, in Frankenstein his tissue seems to just put itself back together. One of the later films noted how all of his cells appeared to behave as if independently animated and sentient. For as strong as he is, the golem is famously noted as having a below-average intelligence. While he possesses the ability to carry out simple tasks, he generally lacks higher reasoning that would allow him to act in place of instruction. Some tales state he becomes smarter over time, but this is not a significant aspect of his character. Stories where his rampage was caused by heartbreak suggests some level of emotional intelligence, albeit primitive. Possibly his greatest strength here is not Frankenstein's body, but his genius mind. He was able to fluently read, write, and speak both French and German within a little over 2 years, entirely through observation and self-teaching. He is also shown to employ strategy and think outside the box to accomplish complex tasks. A big part of this comes from observation. Frankenstein is adept at employing stealth and studying those around him, often for very lengthy periods of time. While not incredibly bright, the golem has shown to use tools and items to carry out his given tasks, in one instance even apprehending someone by tying them up with a rope. Rabbi Lowe also gave Joseph a magical amulet that could render him invisible, as well as enable him to summon forth ghosts. It should go without saying that the intelligence of Frankenstein is great enough that he is logically able to make use of tools and weapons in situations where his own strength is not enough. However, he has rarely resorted to this as his own physical strength is often all he is needed. The universal weakness of the golem is the vulnerability of that which animates them. In most media, this is the name written on the golem's forehead or hand, and wiping away a letter to change truth to instead say death will cause the golem to cease living. However, this specific form of the weakness is found in variations where the golem is still made from malleable earth. In versions where the clay is depicted as dried or fired, the golem is instead given life through the shem, written on a scroll or paper inserted into their mouth. Likewise, removing or destroying this paper will result in the golem's deactivation. While the monster's biologically immortal cells may be able to repair themselves, destroying the cells directly would circumvent this. The most direct way to accomplish this would be with fire, something he made use of himself when he ultimately decided to take his own life at the end of the novel. Modern depictions put a twist on this by giving him a strong pyrophobia, a fear of fire. This match is the closest I've seen so far, with both monsters demonstrating straightforward ways of defeating their opponent. But factoring in everything above, I believe the winner of this fight would be the golem. Here's why. It took at least a month for Frankenstein to become fully acclimated with his own body, and much more time for him to display the intelligence needed for any real advantage in a fight such as this. The golem, meanwhile, needed no time to begin carrying out his basic tasks, growing more powerful by the day and becoming uncontrollable after only 1 week. A 1-week-old Frankenstein would stand no chance against a 1-week-old golem, and the gap in power would only get bigger as the older the two got. But for fairness, let's assume this is a fully aged Frankenstein fighting a 1-week-old golem. If we say the golem's method of animation was his name on his forehead, Frankenstein would only need to wipe off 1 letter. Easy enough for an old rabbi to do it, why not the monster here? While this weakness is a very simple one to exploit, there is no indication Frankenstein would know about it, as he hasn't demonstrated any direct knowledge of Hebrew myth or the ability to read Hebrew text to know what the name means. Him hitting Yosef's forehead would be little more than a lucky first strike. There's also the possibility the golem is instead animated by a scroll it has swallowed. Either way, Frankenstein would need to break the golem down the old-fashioned way, making this a battle of brawn, something the golem would excel at. Any attacks the golem lands are almost certainly going to cripple or at least seriously injure Frankenstein. He may be immortal and able to heal from virtually any injury, but this is shown to take time as it would for any human. Assuming the monster could take a few strikes and escape to recover, any time spent recovering or planning is more time for the golem to continue growing stronger. Frankenstein may bust chains, but the golem busts whole buildings. When the golem's fists strike brick and stone, the stones are what shatter, not the golem's fists, meaning his durability also increases over time to be stronger than those materials. In the time it would take for Frankenstein to whittle down the golem's tough exterior, the golem would have mashed the giant zombie into little more than immortal hamburger. And when it was feared that a race of Frankensteins would threaten humanity, that threat would come from ecological pressure and require an entire population. Meanwhile, it was feared that a single golem would grow big and strong enough to destroy all of civilization alone. It is for these reasons that I believe if these two artificial men were to throw down, the one walking away from this fight would be the golem. I hope you all enjoyed the video as much as I did making it. You can show your support by giving the video a like or sharing it with a friend, and if you really want to help out, you can become one of my supporters on Patreon and gain access to a few fun perks. Anything you could do would greatly help out and make it easier for me to make more of these in the future. Until next time, this has been Zenonaki, signing off.